Hey, I'm golf broadcaster Matt Adams. The updated and expanded second edition of my book, The Golf Round I'll Never Forget, Golf's Biggest Stars Recall Their Finest Moments, is now available. Readers can expect to march with Arnie's Army at the 1960 U.S. Open, relive Jack Nicklaus's remarkable 1986 Masters win, and be amazed by the Tiger Slam. The Golf Round I'll Never Forget, Golf's Biggest Stars Recall Their Finest Moments. Pick it up where fine books are sold, including BarnesandNoble.com and Amazon.com.
This Day in Sports History. And welcome back to This Day in Sports History, a member of the Sports History Podcast Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sports. Learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com. It's June 14th, and on this day in 1949, Philadelphia first baseman Eddie Waitkus was shot by an obsessed fan. While this story reached its horrible and near-fatal conclusion on this day, it really started about 3 years earlier. In 1946, Eddie Waitkus was back playing baseball with the Chicago Cubs after spending time in the Pacific Theater during World War II. He earned 4 Bronze Stars for heroism during his time there. He was a popular player with the Cubs, not only because of his service to his country, but he was a solid first baseman and hitter with an average a little above 300. Well, 16-year-old Ruth Steinhagen was a Chicago Cubs fan and soon formed an unhealthy obsession for Waitkus. Her mother would later recall, Waitkus was all her daughter talked about. She saw several therapists to help her with her obsession, but she kept going to Wrigley to watch the Cubs play and specifically Waitkus. After the '48 season, the Cubs traded him to the Philadelphia Phillies, to which Steinhagen made a mental note to herself, if I can't have him, nobody else will either. That fact came out during the trial years later. When the 1949 schedule came out, she made note of when the Phillies would be making a trip to Chicago for a 4-game series. Steinhagen made a 3-day reservation for the Edgewater Beach Hotel on Sheridan Road. That was the hotel the team would be staying in when they arrived. On this day, the Phillies and Cubs played an afternoon game, with Philadelphia winning 9-2. Waitkus had a hit and drew a walk and scored twice. At the hotel after the game, Steinhagen passed a note handwritten on Edgewater Beach Hotel stationery to a bellhop to give to Waitkus. It read, Mr. Waitkus, it's extremely important that I see you as soon as possible. We're not acquainted, but I have something of importance to speak to you about. I think it would be to your advantage to let me explain it to you, as I'm leaving the hotel. When Waitkus went to her room, she let him in and then confronted him. She told him, for 2 years you have been bothering me, and now you are going to die, and then shot him in the chest with a .22 caliber rifle. She calmly picked up the phone in the room, dialed the front desk, and reported the shooting. When the paramedics arrived at the room, Steinhagen was cradling Waitkus's head in her lap. Waitkus was rushed to the hospital. The bullet had missed his heart but had punctured a lung. It took several operations to remove the bullet. He came close to dying several times on the operating table. Now, this was one of the first cases in the U.S. that was recognized to be a case of criminal stalking. However, Waitkus did not press charges against Steinhagen, but she was committed to a mental institution for several years. The event is said to be the inspiration for Bernard Malamud's 1954 book, The Natural, which was turned into the 1984 movie by the same name, starring Robert Redford and Glenn Close. Waitkus actually returned to play more baseball. He rejoined the Phillies in 1950 and played until 1955. He died in 1972 at the age of 53 from esophageal cancer. Ruth Ann Steinhagen lived a reclusive life on Chicago's northwest side after her release until her passing in 2012. On this day in 1994, the curse on the New York Rangers was finally broken. It was Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Finals between the Vancouver Canucks and the New York Rangers at New York's Madison Square Garden. The Garden was packed with 18,500 screaming fans, and it was as loud as it had ever been in its history. Every Rangers fan had the hope that this night would be the end of a 54-year-old curse. Brian Leach put the Rangers on the board in the first period, and then Adam Graves followed that up later in the period with a power play goal to make it 2-0. Trevor Linden puckered some orifices when he scored a second period goal to have the Rangers' advantage, but things relaxed a little when Mark Messier netted another power play goal with 6:31 left in the final period. The Rangers had to stave off a furious rally as Linden scored again, and then pinged 2 shots off the post with the extra skater in the final minute. It was a 3-2 win for the Rangers to win their first Stanley Cup in 54 years. So, what's all this curse business? Well, first off, you can't have a long championship drought without some sort of otherworldly explanation, like a goat or a really bad trade. I mean, are we just supposed to believe that the team just wasn't good, or they didn't rise to the occasion when it really counted? Well, there are a couple of theories as to the origin of this supposed curse. One, after winning the Cup in 1940, the Rangers burned their newly paid-off mortgage on the Garden in the bowl of Lord Stanley's Cup. Some considered that a desecration, and therefore such defilement shall not go unpunished. Another theory goes that Red Dutton, the owner and the coach of the New York Americans hockey team, suspended operations of the team during World War II due to his roster of players joining up to go fight Hitler, with the understanding that once the war was over, the team would start back up again and play at Madison Square Garden. But the Rangers and the NHL welched on their promise after the war and did not allow the Americans to rejoin, at which point Dutton hexed the Rangers, saying, "They'll never win another cup in my lifetime." Dutton died in 1988, and so that kind of fits with 6 extra years thrown in just for spite, I suppose. Or maybe you could just blame the elephants. During the 1950 Stanley Cup Finals, Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus had booked the Garden for that time in advance of the Rangers making the finals. Since there was no way at that point to hold both events in the same venue, the Rangers played 2 of their games in Toronto and the other 5 in their 7-game series on the road in Detroit. They lost in 7 games. So, whether you believed in the curse or not, Mark Messier and the New York Rangers finally lofted the cup in the air on this night in 1994. In 1990, it was Game 5 of the NBA Finals between the Detroit Pistons and the Portland Trail Blazers. And just like I talked about yesterday with Michael finding Steve Kerr for the game winner in '97, this was similar in that the man everybody figured would be taking the final shot dished to an unlikely hero. The Pistons trailed by 7 with under 3 to play, but they closed that gap in a hurry, and when Isaiah Thomas scored the last of his 29 points with 36.5 seconds left, the game was tied at 90. After getting a stop on the other end, here's how the final seconds sounded that night.
Isaiah with his back to Porter. All the Pistons standing on the baseline. Inside 10 seconds, he still has it. 6 seconds, starting to drive, dishes to Vinnie. VJ against Kersey, jumps it up. VJ scores! It's 92-90. The microwave scores with 0.7 seconds left in the game.
Vinnie Johnson, also known as the microwave because he heated up on the offensive end in a hurry, hit the awkward, off-balance shot over Jerome Kersey to seal the win for the Pistons and secure their second straight NBA title. After the game, VJ talked about living the dream of every kid who has ever picked up a ball in the driveway or on the playground.
Yeah, I dream about that stuff since I was a kid. Never was in a situation like that, especially in the pros. And hey, but when you get here and you get the ball, and I looked at the clock, and, I knew it was a tie score, and just let it go, man. It felt good. All night, I couldn't believe it.
Now to 1998, and this was Game 6 of the NBA Finals between the Chicago Bulls and the Utah Jazz. Bulls were up 3-2 and looking for their second three-peat. It was Michael Jordan's last game as a Chicago Bull. That wasn't known at the time. He would not officially retire until 7 months later during the lockout. But that's what this turned out to be. And this game was the perfect closing chapter to his novel Bulls career. As he had done so many times before, he outthought, outplayed, and willed his team to victory in this one. With the Bulls down 3 and with 40 seconds to play, Jordan took Brian Russell to the hoop and scored to make it a 1-point game, but also ensured they would get the ball back. And they most certainly did, thanks to MJ. On the defensive end, Jordan made a heads-up defensive play doubling Karl Malone in the low post, stripping the mailman to get the ball back. And then calmly, assuredly, and never giving the ball up, Jordan walked the ball up the court, isolated on Russell again, and went to work. Here's Bob Costas on the call for NBC that day.
17 seconds from Game 7 or from championship number 6. Jordan, open, Chicago with the lead!
John Stockton's shot attempt on the other end was a bit off the mark, and the Bulls had their 6th NBA title in the 90s. Jordan finished the game with 45 points. In his career, Jordan hit 25 game-winning shots, and this one would have been fitting as the final sentence in that book. But of course, as you probably know, even though he retired for the second time in January, he added an epilogue to his career that could probably have been left unwritten. And on this day in 2000, on the eve of the U.S. Open played that year at Pebble Beach, 21 golfers gathered on the 18th fairway, teed up a golf ball, and fired a shot into Stillwater Cove below as a tribute to Payne Stewart. Stewart won the U.S. Open the year prior, but he had died in a mysterious plane incident or accident in October. The plane carrying Stewart and others crashed in South Dakota, but reconnaissance flights checking on an unresponsive crew indicated all aboard had died prior to the crash due to a sudden loss of cabin pressure. Time now for today's non-sports Did You Know? There once was a time about 10,000 years ago when the Sahara Desert was lush and green, but the Earth wobbled on its axis, and now it's a desert. That's all for today. I'll have more tomorrow on This Dish. This Day in Sports History is a member of the Sports History Podcast Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sports. Learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, a.k.a. the Football History Dude, and I hope that you enjoyed this recent episode presented by the Sports History Network and were able to learn some good old-fashioned sports history knowledge nuggets. I started the Sports History Network back in 2020 with the mission to help podcasters find a community of like-minded sports history nerds, as well as helping aspiring podcasters to start their own shows. We have a little bit over 30 shows on the network right now covering all sorts of sports history, but as far as I'm concerned, we're just at the toothpick in the ocean moment, that can't even figure it out because there's so much more coming. We wanted to create the ultimate headquarters for sports yesteryear, starting with Podcast Network and our website, but we're going to continue to move into other mediums as well. And here's the cool part, because we want you to be part of our team. So if you're interested in starting your own podcast, or maybe being a guest on one of our shows, or who knows, maybe even writing an article for us over on the website. Seriously, all you gotta do is reach out to us on the contact page over at sportshistorynetwork.com. You can be as technologically savvy as a Neanderthal tapping on a stone trying to figure out this whole hieroglyphics thing back in the day. Again, it doesn't matter, because even if you don't understand the whole podcast space, we have a production team that can pretty much help you out with doing everything. All you gotta do, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com, head to the contact page, fill it out. That message goes right to me, and I'll reach out to you as soon as I can. But for now, dude, I'm through if you're through.